this stuff. Today's presentation is really more of a fun one. This one, you're going to get some interesting insights. In fact, some of the things you learn today might be some of the most sort of useful tips you will ever see when it comes to video. But these are, we're not talking strategy. We're not talking a ton of how-to. In particular, what I'm going to show you today are 10 different phone camera hacks that can become really, really useful in different scenarios. So what's sort of my favorite part of this presentation today is that you never know which one of these things are going to with who, right? So some of you might find one really useful, others might find it not, but then there'll be something later on in here that will be useful for you. So I'm going to just go ahead and make sure everybody's muted, and let's go ahead and get into it. So let's go to hack or tip number 1. All right, so this one is, in my mind, one of the most useful things to know about making a video when you first get started, right? So when you're first getting started, the challenge of video, and just sort of a quick side note or a quick piece of advice for you here, is when you first get started making videos, try to intentionally keep things as simple as humanly possible, all right? So the first video you ever make should have no production quality whatsoever. It should basically just be you holding your phone up and talking into the camera, right? That's pretty much it. So what that's going to mean is it's going to allow you to focus on how your delivery is, right? It's going to allow you to focus on smiling and being confident and approaching the camera correctly. Well, one of the things that we have found over the years that can be the most confusing or frustrating or kind of an issue when you're making your first few videos is the challenge of reaching out, hitting the record button on the screen, and then immediately starting to speak into the camera in a way that is natural or compelling, right? So that can be a little bit of a hindrance for a lot of folks. And we've had a lot of people tell us, hey, when I first get started, a lot of times I feel like the beginnings of my videos aren't very clean. They're not very professional, right? I don't come across as confident as I would like to. And so this is something that's going to help a lot with that, all right? So here's what I want you to think about. The next time you record a video, if you've never done one before, you can start this way. I want you to think of the beginning of the recording of the video as being a totally separate thing than the beginning of the actual final video, right? So a lot of us have this attitude of like, well, I hit the button and then I got to start talking right away because that's the beginning of my recording. But the reality is all of your phones, as long as they're less than, maybe 5 or 6 years old, anything newer than that should have these features built in that will actually allow you to do just a tiny bit of editing, right? And I know that may sound complicated, but this particular thing is actually really simple. So what we're going to show you is I'm going to show you some advice here on how to trim the beginning and the ending of your video. Let me check my next slide real quick just to make sure I'm not. Yeah, so I was going to say, I do think I have some instructions here. So let me go back because I don't want to distract you with the instructions quite yet because I want to give you some advice first, all right? And again, if you are jumping on just now, make sure you're muted so we don't want to have any distractions in the background. I'll kind of check through and make sure I've muted anybody that has joined in the past few minutes here. But if you are, just make sure you get yourself muted there. All right, cool. So this first one, what I want you to do is this. When you go to record your video, all right, I want you to open up your selfie camera. And this is one that if you haven't ever made a video before, you might as well follow along at home because it's something worth practicing. And what we're going to do is before I worry about saying anything or doing anything else, I'm actually going to just go ahead and hit the record button. All right. So we don't want to have 5 minutes of dead space here, right? I want to be sort of in my spot. I want to be sort of prepared to record my video, but I'm not going to rush to start delivering my message into the camera. Right. So what I want you to do is you're going to reach out, you're going to hit record, right? Then you're going to get yourself situated. So you're going to get yourself into the right spot on the frame. You're going to have your head in the top half of the frame, all that kind of stuff. And then here's the important part. I want you to make eye contact with the camera lens, not look at your own face. Okay. So you get situated, then you make eye contact with the camera lens, then you start delivering your lines. All right. And so if you need an advanced kind of tip here, this one I don't think is actually in the presentation. You can take a Post-it note and stick it over your face. So if you have trouble not looking at yourself on the screen, just put a Post-it note over your face on the screen, and that's going to help a lot, right? But the point here is that I'm going to get situated while I'm already recording, and then I'm going to do my lines. Then, so one last thing I'll say is smile first, right? So I get situated, looking at the camera, smile, start recording, right? When you finish, smile at the end. Hold it for a couple seconds, then reach down and hit the stop button. Okay. So let's talk about what we're going to do with that now. Right. So here's what we're doing. Right. What we're going to now do is what I want you, and this is why it's helpful to have recorded a quick clip here. And if you just want to pull an existing video file up on your phone for this purpose, you can. But what I want you to do next is go to find the video in the gallery. On most phones, the easiest way to do that is when you record your video, in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen is going to be the gallery button, right? That's where you can access all the photos and videos you just recorded. So you click on that button, you open up your gallery. And this should be the last file that's just ready to go, right? So the very first file you see in your phone should be what you just recorded. What you're going to do now is you're going to click on either the edit button if you're in an iPhone, or if you're on an Android, it looks like a little pencil, right? That's the edit button on an Android in most cases. So we're going to click on that associated with the video we just recorded. And then this is all we have to do, right? So at the bottom of the screen now, you should see a little bar, and that's called the timeline, right? It kind of looks like a bunch of individual pictures from your video. And that's what it is. It's literally every single frame that you just recorded is sort of available there at the bottom of the screen. And what you'll see is on either end of that timeline is a little bar, right? So on the iPhone, it's going to look like this, I believe, unless they've updated it since I last checked, but it should be sort of yellow bars and then a little sort of tilde, sort of, I don't know, half triangle type of thing at the end. And on Android, they're probably white with a little line in them, right? Now, what that means is that I can hold down on either end of that clip and drag it in, okay? So what we do here is we hold down at the beginning, and we drag it in until we see ourselves smile and start to talk, right? And right before we start to talk, we drop it right at that spot, all right? Same thing with the end of the video now, as we hold our finger down on that little bar at the very end of the video, and we drag it in until we see ourselves stop talking, right? And then we put it right after we stop talking, because in this case, it's the actual end of the video. All right. And again, you just sort of hold your finger down on it, you drag it in, you find where you stopped, you smile, right? That's another reason it's helpful to smile, because it's sort of an easy thing to notice. And then you let go right at that spot. What that has now done is it's trimmed out, it's removed all of the dead space at the beginning and the end of your video, right? So what that means now is that anytime you record, and eventually you might be confident enough, you might be sort of fast enough to just hit the record button and start going, right? So you don't have to do this forever, but especially when you're first getting started, this is really helpful because you don't have to then rush to start delivering your lines, right? So you'll see that in a lot of people's videos where the first 5 or 10 seconds, they seem kind of flustered, right? And it's because they're trying to deal with this whole hit the button and then look at the camera and smile right away and start delivering my lines all at the same time, which can be a little bit overwhelming, right? So that's all we're doing, right? We're going to record, we're going to take our time, then we're going to deliver our video, we're going to smile at the end, we're going to give it a couple seconds, then we're going to stop, and then you just come in here and you trim out the beginning and the end, right? Last thing you're obviously going to want to do is once it looks good, once you feel like you've trimmed it just to the right spot, you click on save, and that's going to save a new version of that video with the beginning and the end trimmed out. All right. So really sort of simple stuff. I mean, again, a lot of these hacks are going to be pretty straightforward, but that is a big one. We have a lot of students who feel like, hey, if I didn't know how to do that, I would not be making videos because I would feel so flustered when I hit that record button that it would really mess me up. So I have another tip kind of related to this that'll come up here and a few more. But this one I think is a really good one, especially for beginners. So if you've been intimidated, if that's one of the things that's kind of tripped you up, practice this, right? You don't have to make your first video and then that be the first time you use it. In fact, if you want to sit down, practice going through that process once or twice or even 10 times, that's going to help you get more confident on camera. And then a lot of this is about learning to use the tech, right? So once I know how to use that technology, once I know how to make sure I'm making eye contact with the camera and not distracting myself, that's going to make you a lot more confident on camera. And then you can worry about other things, right? Then you can worry about what you're actually saying or the way you're going to move your hands during the video, how much you want to smile, right? Those are important parts of this too. So we get the tech out of the way and then we're good to go. All right. Moving on, we got a lot of these to cover today. So like I said, feel free to ask questions or interrupt me as we go if you have anything that you want to follow up on. So this is the second one I want to give you. This one's a little goofy, I'll be honest, all right? But this is one that if you ever encounter this scenario, can actually turn out to be quite helpful. And it's also a little bit more useful now that most people have old phones laying around, okay? So one question that we get all the time is, I want to repurpose my content. I want to make something, but I want to use it on different platforms. And this has become a bigger issue over the past couple of years, right? It used to be a few years ago, most anything you recorded was going to be done horizontally, right? So you're going to be holding your phone this way, or if you had a traditional camera, obviously those cameras are set up to record horizontally, right? And so what's happened though is we've had these new platforms emerge, TikTok and Reels and, pretty much anything you're going to consume on your phone, people hold their phones vertically, right? So now we have all these different screens. We got vertical screens when it comes to phones, but we also still have horizontal with laptops, computers, TVs, things like that, right? So this one, again, is a little more obscure. This isn't going to be as useful for everybody, but if you ever get in a situation where you need both versions of a video, you can actually just rubber band two phones together. I know it kind of looks and feels a little bit ridiculous, but it actually works very well, and it eliminates some significant problems for you. So number one, you're going to capture the footage at the same time. You don't have to re-record something, right? You don't have to come back and try to get a secondary shot. The other thing that this does for you is it means you're going to have a high quality version of both versions of the video, right? So what you would have done in the past is recorded horizontally and cropped out the middle and then made that a vertical video on its own. Well, doing it this way eliminates that frustration or that potential issue, right? Because you actually record both files completely separately. And then a further pro tip would obviously be make sure to use the phone you're going to upload it from, right? So if one of those phones you're going to upload to TikTok or Reels, then that's the vertical one. The other one you can use for YouTube or computers, right? So I don't want to dwell on that one too long because that one's a little bit more of a unique situation, but that can be useful if you run into that one, all right? Now, this is a big one. This is one that I think everybody should be using. And in fact, if I open up my camera right now, I just sort of want to verify for myself. Yes, I actually do have this turned on, and it's basically always on my phone. It's called your grid lines, right? So this is something that's really, it's a subtle thing, but it's way more important than you would realize. And so here's the reality. There is a certain way that you should be framed in your videos, right? There's a certain spot on the screen that you should try to occupy, all right? And so the way that these lines work, this is actually a rule from photography that's sort of translated over to videography, and it's called the rule of thirds, right? And the idea is that if you divide your screen into sections, the 1/3 at a time, right? So you've got two lines horizontally and then two lines vertically, and this goes both directions, right? So even if you're holding your phone vertically, it's just going to rotate. You're going to see this in a different orientation, but you're still going to have the same number of lines and all that stuff, right? So here's what this does for you. Why do we want these lines turned on, right? Well, I'll tell you one thing in particular that I see all the time. It sort of drives me nuts, and I'm honestly not sure why it happens so often, but that is, and I'm kind of curious if anybody else has ever seen this or if you feel like you encounter this at all, which is the person in the video is in the bottom half of the screen, right? So like, you've ever been on a Zoom meeting where the person's like, their head is like at the bottom and then there's a bunch of stuff all around them at the top, and it almost seems like they're trying to hide below the camera, right? I mean, I see that all the time. I don't know if you do, but I do a lot of Zoom meetings. Well, I see it in particular on vertical videos, right? So when people are shooting themselves vertically and all I can see is just their head and it's just at the bottom of the screen, right? Well, we might say, well, okay, what's the big deal? They can still see my face, right? Well, here's the thing about video. The power of video is that when someone watches a video of you, that they feel like they're having a face-to-face conversation. In fact, your brain at a fundamental level cannot tell the difference, right? I mean, think about how long evolution takes. You have to have many, many generations before the human brain changes substantially, right? It changes very slowly. We haven't had video for very long, and we certainly haven't had, peer-to-peer video for hardly more than 5 or 10 years at this point, right? It's very new. So when your brain sees another person's face and it hears their voice and that person is moving around in front of them, what do you think your brain is thinking? It's thinking, hey, this person must be sitting down in front of me talking to me. That is fundamentally the power of video, is that video, because of that, is a much more intimate experience, right? It's a much more impactful way to communicate with someone else. And we see that all the time, right? We see the results of the relationships that build because of video. So what happens when you frame yourself incorrectly is you're actually counteracting that effect, right? You're basically telling that other person's brain, yeah, this is me, and yeah, it should sort of feel like we're here together in person, but I'm going to make it feel weird for no good reason, right? I'm going to make it feel like it's just my head floating around in front of you, and it's also down on the table, right? Like that's a very strange sort of human behavior. So I know I'm kind of harping on that a little bit because it's a pet peeve of mine. I'll just tell you a quick story real quick to reiterate it. I was watching one video from a woman once, and she had the phone tilted, up like this. Her head was the only thing I could see. Above her on the ceiling was a water stain, and like kind of a nasty water stain in particular, I don't remember what the rest of her video is about. All I can remember is the water stain, right? So that's an extreme case. But the point is, when you frame yourself correctly, when your head, and here's kind of the rule you want to follow, your head should be at least in the top half of the frame, all right? So if your head is in the bottom half of the frame, you need to move up a little bit, or you need to tilt your camera down a little bit, right? That's going to get your frame more correctly. And then people are going to have a better experience watching your video. So what you do is you turn on the grid lines in your phone. Now, where do you find this? If you're on an Android, it's pretty handy. You just go to the little gear icon, click on that, and you want to look for grid lines and turn those on, all right? If you're on an iPhone, you will have to go into your settings app, which is separate from the camera, find the camera settings, and turn the grid lines on there, but they're both pretty easy to find, right? Once you do that, you'll see these two lines vertically, two lines horizontally. Again, if you flip the phone, you'll also see them. And basically, the rule I want you to follow to keep this simple is I want you to focus on that top line being your face needs to be on it somehow, right? So you can see in her case, she's sort of framed so that her eyes are on the top line. It can be your nose, it can be your mouth, but the point is that your head needs to in some way sort of interact with that top of the two lines. If you do that, you're framed correctly, you're not going to sort of disassociate the person. They're not going to sort of have that weird experience of talking to a floating head sitting on a table, and you're probably going to have a better video as a result, right? So just some thoughts there in terms of turning those lines on. So here's some screenshots really quick. I think I only have iPhone. Yeah, that's correct. But on the Android, it is even easier. Like I said, you literally just click the gear icon inside your camera, and you should see a toggle switch that says on or off. In the iPhone, it's literally you just go to the settings app, you go to the camera settings within the settings app, and you'll see the word grid. You switch that on, and you're good to go, right? And there's obviously all these other settings that you can mess around with. If you've never made any adjustments to this, I wouldn't mess with it initially, but if you get more experience with video and you want to play around with, slow motion or being able to record in higher qualities and make changes to it, you're good to go there, all right? Moving on. All right, this is one of my favorites, this particular tip. So this is a flashlight in a trash bag, all right? So a little bit ridiculous, I understand that, but surprisingly effective in a pinch, right? So some of these tips are going to be this kind of thing where it's like, hey, usually and hopefully you do not need to do this because if you've got an actual light, you're good to go, right? Or maybe you're in a room with a window and you can use that. But let's say that you stop by, a house that you're trying to list and you want to record a video there and it's sort of a cloudy day, or maybe the electric's turned off or something, right? Or maybe it's the evening and it's kind of dark outside. There are situations where you're going to need to have a source of light. And a lot of times you can find a flashlight and you can find a trash bag, or another thing you could use is a sheet. The nice thing about the trash bag is you can actually inflate it and then just hold the flashlight inside of it with just one hand. You could also tie the trash bag around the flashlight and set it somewhere, and then you literally have a sort of a third-party light that you can use anywhere. Now, why do you need the trash bag? Okay, why not just shine the flashlight at yourself? Well, look at the difference here. I mean, I was literally sort of shocked when I took these two pictures with how much of a difference it actually makes. So one of the rules of lighting is that you want to have what's called diffused or soft light, right? Now, what does that mean? I don't want to get too scientific with you here right now, but when you shine a beam of light, right, all of the photons are moving in the same direction, right, which is why we call it a beam of light. Well, that isn't very flattering, right? It's going to create a very hot spot, one spot where the light has a lot of extra photons, and then everything around it gets a lot darker very quickly, right? So imagine like a stage light. The guy's up in the rafters of the theater, and he's shining that spotlight down on that one person, and they're lit up, and they're really bright, and nothing around them is lit up, right? That's what something like a flashlight is going to normally do. And there's a lot of other lights that might be in your office or your room that are going to also work that way, right? Well, what we want is we want light that's actually scattered in all directions. So I want you to think about a cloudy day for just a second, right? When you're outside on a cloudy day, technically there's plenty of sunlight, right? We can still see what's around us. I mean, it's not like the clouds block 100% of the sun, but what they do is they scatter the sunlight, right? So if the sun is shining down on a sunny day and it goes straight to you, there's a shadow behind you, right? Because the photons are all heading in one direction. But instead, when they hit a cloud, they head in a bunch of different directions. They scatter out. And that means that there's usually no shadows on a cloudy day, right? Because the light is diffused. It's actually really good for photos or videos. So if you ever need to shoot outside, cloudy days are a lot of times actually better than sunny days. So that's what the trash bag is doing for you, is it's taking that bright spotlight and it's hitting the material of the trash bag. And like I said, you could use a sheet or something as well, but the bag you can inflate, which is handy. And then it's scattering those beams of light, and it's giving you a much more even illumination, right? So you can see that really clearly here in this bottom picture. You can see how intense the light is right there on the side of my face. And then as you go up or down, it immediately starts to get a little bit darker. And then on the other one, you can see how I'm evenly lit. The side of my face, even my shoulder, you can tell that it's all much more diffused light. I don't have weird, intense shadows. I mean, the second picture, there's literally a spot on my face you can hardly see because it's so bright, right? So again, this is one of those where it's like, how many times are you going to need to do this, right? But on the other hand, like if you don't have a light in your house right now, a video light, and you wanted to try this, like this is surprisingly effective, right? Now, I will mention, obviously, it needs to be a white trash bag. It cannot be a black trash bag because that's not going to let the light come through. So you would need that particular kind of trash bag, but it is surprisingly effective if you do have one like that. Just, I do recommend using an unscented trash bag, because if you're going to hold this close to your face to make a video, that may bother some folks, right? I'm not a big fan of the scent on those things. Last thing I'll mention here is that because of how this works, you can either put the flashlight inside of it and then rubber band it around and set it somewhere, or you can hold it in your hand while you record with the other hand, all right? So just a couple different ways to do it if you need to. Okay, now this one, give me a second, because I actually have one here I'm just going to grab real quick. But this is probably one of my my favorite hacks for sure, and I'm gonna show you sort of a replacement for it as well. So this is the cup hack. All right. One of the biggest things you're going to run into when you're making video is you want to make sure you have stable footage, right? So in a lot of cases, you've got your phone, you're going to be holding it in your hand. That's all right, right? But you're going to bounce around a little bit. Here's where it becomes a real issue. I want to make a video where I have my hands available, right? In fact, I highly recommend that you use your hands in your videos, because it's another way to communicate, right? So if you're somebody that never uses their hands to talk, don't start doing it for no reason. But if you do, and a lot of people do, then you do want to have that available, okay? Now, here's what you would typically use. This is what we would call a tabletop tripod, right? It's going to have 3 legs. You can spread it out. This is sort of a fancier one. And then you got a phone mount at the top. If you got one of these, great, right? However, in a pinch, you may need something else. And so this is pretty cool. And in fact, this will do more than the tabletop tripod will, right? It's kind of crazy. I'll tell you what I mean in a second. So here's how this works. And I made this once. And then in a pinch, I've actually made 2 others of these and actually used it. I kind of did this presentation a while back, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, but when am I ever going to make a tripod out of a cup? And then on several trips that came up after that, I actually did it because I needed a tripod. So it's really simple, right? I mean, this one's pretty straightforward. In fact, this is a plastic cup. It's going to work better with a paper cup because it's easier to cut with a pair of scissors. But all you're going to do is you're going to cut across the bottom, down the side, come over about 1/2 inch, come back up on the side, and then across the bottom, and do the same on the other side, right? The only really important thing here is that you make sure that both sides are cut down to essentially the same spot, right? In fact, on this one, I even sort of rolled it over and pinched it down until they were level. And all you're aiming for is just a slot where you can put your phone, right? So there you go. My phone fits sort of perfectly right into that slot. So make sure it's wide enough for your phone, but not too much wider. All right. Now, that's the first way you use this. So just literally pop your phone into it. Now you can set it anywhere you want, and you've got a tabletop tripod. All right. So, pretty basic stuff, obviously. But here's where it becomes even more useful than a traditional tabletop tripod. And that is that this cup will also slide across surfaces. All right. So this is more advanced. This is not something that a beginner making videos for the first time would need to worry about. But if you ever get to the point where you're starting to make, especially home videos, listing videos, stuff like that, if you put this on a countertop and you slide it, and you can't quite see it, I'm going to do it on my desk, but I don't know if that's in the shot. I don't think it is. But you basically just slide it really slowly and gradually. You're able to create these really cool moving shots, right? Now, you can do something similar by just holding the phone, but a lot of times that's not going to be anywhere near as stable, right? You're not going to keep everything framed just properly. So where that's really cool is like, for instance, let's say you're in a home with some really high-end appliances, and you want to get some really cool shots that sort of focus on, maybe the really expensive stove top or something that they have, right? Well, you can go across to the island on the other side of the kitchen. You put your phone there, and then you sort of do one of these as you slide across the counter, and you make sure to keep it focused on that particular appliance. And that's a really cool way to create some movement in your video. One of the things you want to remember is when you're recording a listing video, any sort of movement you can add is a good thing, because that means it was worth it being a video, right? If you don't have any movement, you might as well have just taken pictures, right? So keep that in mind. It's another thing that you can do with the particular phone, sorry, in this case, the cup hack, which is something a little bit different. All right. So that's our first 5. We got 5 more to share with you. I do want to give you a quick opportunity if you are interested in accessing any of our free downloadable guides. So what you're going to want to do to access this is just open up the photo setting on your camera, right? So go to the camera app like we had open earlier, switch it to the photo setting, and then just point it at the screen right now. It's going to pop up on the screen. It's going to give you a little URL to visit. Now, here's what you're going to find. Let me actually show you the next slide, because I want to give you an idea of what we have available. So one of the things we try to do in business video schools, we try to provide as much free value as we can afford to, because we want people to learn how to use this stuff, right? So we've got 5 or 6 different options available here on this site. So if you scan that QR code, that's the last one you just saw, you can access our free mini course, which is 14 short videos, each about a different topic when it comes to making video. Especially if you're a beginner, that's a great place to start. We've also got a home video studio that you can set up for under $350. So if you're looking to get started and you want to have a little bit of a setup, that's going to be a great option for you. There's several others there. I'm not going to read all of them, so I want to get back to the content today. But in particular, if you are looking to get started with TikTok, I know that's a hot topic right now. That one's really cool, because that's going to give you an actual checklist to follow when you're making TikTok videos. All right, cool. So again, I'll keep you muted if you don't mind. If you do have a question, though, feel free to unmute and ask your question as we're going here. So I'm going to hit the next slide here in just another second. So if you do want to access any of the free stuff that we offer through Business Video School, go ahead and scan that real quick. I'll give you just another second. And then do not feel bad to go ahead and sign up for any of this while we're here today, because otherwise, if you're like me, you will forget and you'll get off the presentation in a couple minutes and you won't remember to sign up for the stuff you wanted. So I would just do it while we're here today, and then it's done. All right, moving on. Okay. Couple more things to cover. We have 5 more tips for you on the second half of today's presentation. So this one is a little bit more advanced, but it is really easy to do, and it's going to create some visual variety in your content that you probably don't currently have, right? It's called a flip transition. So here's what we're going to do, right? With this particular hack, we are just going to be using the movement of our phone to create a better visual experience, to create some visual variety, right? So here's what you got to do to use this particular transition is you got to have 2 different locations or 2 different backgrounds, right? Two things to have behind you that are going to look a little bit different. Now you can go further. You can have different clothing on. You could have a different hairdo, whatever you want to do, but there has to be something different between either before and after the transition. Otherwise, there's no point to doing it, right? So here's how I recommend that you use this. If you're recording videos, and this is actually useful if you're a beginner, there are going to be plenty of situations where you have a lot to say, but you're having trouble saying it all in one take, right? So I've got, 5, 6 sentences worth of content. I'm having trouble remembering all 5 or 6 of those sentences. So what you can do is you can split it up into 2, and that makes it a lot easier. You can split into 3, you can split into 4, however many pieces you want. Obviously, the less, the less work it's going to be. So what I want to do is I'm going to hold my phone. This is another one that's worth practicing right now, just so you can get sort of in the habit of doing this. But I'm going to hold my phone up like I'm recording my video. I'm going to say my lines, and then I'm going to flip the phone one direction, all right? So usually it's going to be down towards me or back, away from me, right? I'm going to flip it one of those 2 ways, and you can decide which one you want to do. And here's the key to doing this correctly. You want to do it aggressively, all right? This isn't a, hey, blah, 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 and then slowly drop the phone. This is, all right, I'm telling you, here's my first tip, done, drop it, right? As fast as you can, because what you want to create is a blur. You want the phone to kind of like almost like it fell over backwards, right? And then the second one you do, when you start that clip, you hit record, you take your phone and you put it in the other opposite orientation. So if I flipped forward last time, I'm going to start with it down toward me this time and flip up, right? Well, why do we do that? Think about the motion of those clips then, right? It makes it look like the phone basically did like it flipped over like this. You see what I'm doing there? So that's the effect we're creating, where the phone almost does like a somersault, but then all of a sudden I'm in a new location, right? That's the whole point here. So we're making a transition between 2 different locations, 2 different outfits, 2 different looks, whatever it might be. And we're doing it physically. This is not something that we're going to have to edit in any kind of software later, right? So again, let's review that one more time. And this is one you're going to see in higher end TikToks and Reels. I would say most people don't do this, but this is a really, really simple way to create some visual variety, right? So especially if you're doing this in a short form video, I would make the transition happen really early in the video. So I'd say like, hey, I got some advice for you, flip, right? And then here you are in the first one. All right, here's my first tip. When you're first listing a house, here's what you want to do. Flip, it's next location. Second thing you want to do is blah, blah, blah. Flip it down again, right? And that's going to just create a really engaging piece of video content. So that's one that's, again, worth practicing. Now, the last thing you're going to want to do when you make this is it is going to require a little bit of editing because I have to combine those clips, right? Now, you could go as far as to use like a pause and then, start recording, but there's a little more complication there. So what you're going to do is you're going to record the clips. You're going to go back to that trimming feature I showed you earlier, right? Where you come in, you kind of clean up the beginning and the end because you want the flip to sort of get cut right in the middle of it, right? You're going to trim it there. And the other one, you're going to trim it down to where the flip is starting to happen. You cut right in the middle of it and it's coming back up, right? And then you're going to use a third-party editing tool. If you want a free one, there's one out there. It's actually created by the company that made TikTok. It's called CapCut, C-A-P-C-U-T. There's also Viva Video if you don't like TikTok. So if you don't want to associate with that company, Viva Video is another option. And what you can do is just drop both clips in there, line them up. They're already trimmed. They're already ready to go, and export your video. If you're going to upload this to something like TikTok or Reels, you can do it on the platform directly, right? I would still recommend you trim the clips first, then you drop them into the editor, and that's what's going to happen, right? You're going to have this clip where it almost looks like you say one line, the phone sort of does a somersault, and all of a sudden you're in a new location. Again, you can get creative with this, right? You can have a new shirt on, you could have a different hat on, all kinds of stuff, right? But that sort of visual variety is what's going to capture people's attention. So anything you can do that's going to capture their attention is worth doing, all right? All right, now this is another one that is built into the phone. This is one that doesn't require any sort of third-party apps or anything like that. And this is more handy than you might realize depending on the situation, right? So this is called locking the focus and the exposure. And the reason that you might want to do this is that if you are in front of the camera, or if there's something in front of the camera that you want to make sure stays in focus, this is going to help you do it. It also, there's another issue you could potentially run into, which is, especially if you have an older phone, this is something that's got a little bit better over the years, but especially if you have a phone that's more than a few years old, you're going to find that if you're standing or sitting in front of the phone and you're recording and you're talking to it and you move your hands or you move around at all, you're going to get this effect where the brightness kind of increases and decreases. It almost makes it look like the video is sort of flashing bright and then going darker over and over again. Well, what's happening in that situation is that the phone is seeing your hands or it's seeing your face move around and it's changing what it thinks it's supposed to stay focused on, right? And so at one point it thinks it's supposed to focus on your hands and the next it thinks it's supposed to focus on your face and it gets a little bit confused. So if you ever have a situation like this where there's a lot of commotion, a lot of things moving around, another example would be, let's say you're at a concert and you're recording what's on stage and people keep moving around in front of you. And so the phone is recording what's on stage, and then all of a sudden you shift just a little, and then it thinks it's recording this guy who's sitting in the row in front of you, and so it focuses on his head and everything else gets blurry. That can be kind of frustrating too, right? So especially if you're recording something at a distance and there's a lot going on, this again can be really helpful. So the way it works, and it's also sort of worth practicing here so that you understand how to do this in the future, is that when you're pointing your phone at something, if you hold your finger down on the screen, it's going to lock both the focus and the exposure, right? And in fact, you'll probably see that when you do that, a little lock icon, or like it says there on the iPhone, the AEAF lock will pop up. But you'll also probably see that there's a little sort of sun looking indicator below it. And if you drag that sun up, it will get brighter. And if you drag it down, it'll get darker. That's the exposure, right? But in this case, the exposure is locking, which means that once I drag it up or down, it's going to stay where I left it, right? So again, where is that useful? Let's say you're out at an event and it's really sunny and it's really bright and everything is almost too bright when you're trying to record it. Well, if you do this, you lock the focus and exposure, and then you drag it down a little bit, it's going to lower the brightness, and it's going to make it easier to see what it is you're recording, right? And you can do the opposite as well. You're in a dark environment, you lock the focus, you turn it all the way up. Now it's nice and bright. You can actually see what you're doing, and you're going to be able to record better content. Now, if you want to turn it off, just click anywhere on the screen and it'll turn off, right? So it's pretty easy to get rid of. So remember that though, if you do lock the focus and the exposure and then you start moving around trying to record normal stuff, that's going to mess up the video. So it is important that you make sure that you have it turned on when you need it to, and then you turn it off when it is no longer useful, right? So that's sort of a handy situational type of tip for you. Okay. Now, coming a little bit full circle from the beginning of today's presentation, we talked about how to trim your videos first. And I do think that especially when you're first getting started, it's a very good idea to use the trim feature. But let's say that you get to a point where you're a little bit more confident on camera and you just want to dive straight into your recording. Well, this one is going to be really helpful for you in that scenario. And this is the fact that the volume buttons, and this might be turned off on your phone. So if it's not going to work on your phone, you may need to look into your settings a little bit because maybe you made a change to it, or maybe the factory settings were set up incorrectly. But on most phones, if you just, again, another one to practice, I would recommend at least, is open up your camera. And if you're on photos, it'll also work, right? So here's what's really cool. When I hit the volume button on my phone, up or down, it shouldn't matter, and I'm in the camera settings, it will start recording. If I hit it again, it'll stop recording, right? So why is that so helpful? Well, again, once I'm a little more comfortable on camera and I feel like I can get situated, right? I can get framed correctly, I can smile, and then now I'm ready to hit the record button. The problem is, even if everything else is fine and I'm confident, I'm ready to roll, I have to look down to see where it is, hit it. That usually messes up my framing. And then I have to look up at the camera right away, and it disorients the beginning of the video. Well, when you use the volume button, that all goes away. Because what I can do now, hold my phone up, get situated, and you see how my finger's over here? Maybe you're going to use this finger on this side. I have my volume buttons actually on the other side of my phone compared to most people. But I hold up my phone, I get situated, I smile, and then I simply click the volume button and I start talking. I don't have to ever look away from the camera. Same thing at the end. I can keep my focus on the camera, deliver my lines, smile, and then immediately hit the button and end. And that means now I've got a really clean beginning and ending to my video without any kind of distraction, right? So honestly, this is one of my favorite hacks of all the different phone hacks out there, because this is one that I actually use all the time. I mean, in fact, I don't know the last time that I went to record a selfie video where I did not use the volume button to start and stop that recording, because it is just that much more natural, right? I don't have to reach out and push something on the screen. I can literally just use my fingers in the spot that they're probably already sitting on your phone, right? When you hold your phone for a selfie, there's a good chance your fingers are quite close to the volume button already, right? And that's part of kind of why they did it. Now, another version of this that is pretty handy is that if you ever want to take a picture, and this goes for both, I mean, that's the same thing with selfies, right? Anytime I take a selfie now, I don't ever reach out with my other finger. I'm always hitting the volume buttons, right? Same thing if you want to take a picture of other people, right? You flip the camera around, and now I can use this button up top like a traditional camera. So for a lot of us that are sort of used to using cameras like that and taking the picture, I can just literally put my finger right here, click, and then the picture is taken, right? So sort of a handy hack in different scenarios, depending on what you're doing. All right, so we're getting towards the end here. We had 2 more left. And then obviously, if you have any questions or want to talk about anything else video related, I'm happy to answer those for you. So at this point, we're getting a little bit more advanced. So let's say we're talking to somebody who's been making video for a while now, right? This is not a total newbie to video, because here's the thing. You should not buy equipment until you encounter the problem the equipment solves. Okay, so think about that for just a second. If you're going to buy a tripod, if you're going to buy a microphone, if you're going to buy a light, any of those things, you should not buy it until you're having a problem that piece of equipment can solve for you, right? Now, you might say, well, I know right off the bat I'm going to want one of these things. And if there's something for sure you know you need, okay, you can go buy it. But here's why I recommend that you think about holding off. The reason is that when you buy equipment that you don't for sure 100% need, you are adding complexity that you don't need yet, right? So if you think about when you're first getting started with video, I know a lot of you that chimed in at the beginning here said that you were getting started, which is great, right? But if you're at that place and you buy something, now you got to learn how to use that thing in addition to everything else you have to learn. And it's a great way to procrastinate, all right? And I'll tell you right now, I know people who bought equipment to make videos 3 or 4 years ago that then never made any videos because they kept telling me, and they would literally say, well, I bought this light and I got all this stuff. I'm setting it up in my basement. I still got to figure out how to use it. Okay. Well, all you need is this, right? We just went over the fact that you can hit the volume button to start recording. What else do you need? You don't need anything else, right? So that's a little bit, again, another little pet peeve of mine, obviously. But I think it's really good advice to say, look, only buy something once you know that you have the problem it fixes. So for instance, lights, let's talk about that for just a second. A lot of people feel like they have to go out and buy lights at the very beginning. And the truth is a window is a great source of light. So you should try standing in front of pretty much every window in your house first, seeing how you look. And you might find, hey, you know what? I look really good right here. This is the spot where I want to record my videos. Now I don't need to buy any other lights, right? I don't have to learn how they work. I don't have to learn how to set them up. I don't have to try to bring them with me if I want to go somewhere else to record a video. Which is a good thing. So this is the tripod. You do have a couple options here, and I want to talk about the difference between these two. And the other thing too is that they come with Bluetooth remotes, right? So these are basically the same tripod. They just, one has a ring light, one doesn't. They're going to extend up to 67 inches in the case without the ring light, 62 in the case with the ring light, right? So for most people, that will be high enough. You want your camera to be at about eye level. That's sort of your ideal height for a tripod. And then they come with Bluetooth remotes, right? So again, this is another one of those situations where it's like, how do I record my video? How do I start and stop it? So if you're somebody who has a little more experience and you don't want to deal with trimming, the Bluetooth remote can come in really handy. You just sync it up with your phone. And then when you want to start recording, you hit record, you start delivering your lines immediately. When you're done, you smile, you hit stop, and that's finished, right? And you can tell I keep saying, especially at the end, to smile, because that's the number one thing people have trouble with when they're first getting started. It's one thing to smile at the beginning of the video. It's another to remember to do it at the very end. But you got to think about it this way. If somebody actually finishes your video, if they get all the way through it, and the last thing they see is your face kind of going back to like a resting face and sort of frowning, it's a weird kind of ending to the video, right? It sort of takes them out of the experience a little bit. So again, not something to obsess over, but worth keeping in mind is that we want to make sure we're smiling at the end there. Also, those make great selfie sticks too. So if you need a selfie stick, you got one in that case. All right. Last tip of the day, and then we'll wrap things up here. I do think we're a little early, which is a good thing. We save you a few minutes today, is overhead time-lapse videos. All right. Now, I want to talk about time-lapse videos in general. In your phone is a setting for time-lapse videos, which I think is really handy. So if you go into your phone, you want to look for hyperlapse or time-lapse, right? So in the settings across the bottom, either photo, video, et cetera, et cetera. My phone has a button that says more, and I have like 12 of these different options in here, right? So same place you would find like your panorama shots or your nighttime shots or your portrait shots. Usually somewhere in there, you're going to find hyperlapse or time-lapse, right? Now, why do I think this is so powerful? Well, the thing is, people love time-lapse videos, right? I don't know about you, if you can think about any time-lapse videos you've seen recently, but especially on social media, you see this stuff all the time, right? I mean, I haven't seen a single video about a craft project that was not a time-lapse. You know what I mean? Like, they all have to be sped up because people just don't have the attention to sit there and watch a 30-minute video of you putting something together. They want to see all that happen in about 30 seconds, right? Well, guess what? With real estate agents, there's often a lot of situations where you can very easily create very engaging content with just doing what you're already doing, right? So anytime you're getting a home ready, right? If you're doing some staging, if you're moving things around, you have an open house and you have a lot of people coming through, all of those videos could be a very easy time-lapse video, right? Even, I mean, heck, even just driving around town, taking people to see different homes, you could time-lapse that entire experience, and I guarantee a bunch of people are going to want to watch it, right? Well, that's a general sort of suggestion, you know, just making time lapses where you can. But in this case, we're going to do a particularly unique version of that. And that is the overhead time lapse, right? So remember this thing from earlier? This is a Joby Gorilla Pod. And the way that this works is it actually has these legs that are bendable, right? So I can sort of wrap them around, a tree branch or something like that. And so the idea here is I want to get this up high. Now, be careful. Obviously, if you're going to do this, you want to use a secure ladder and you want to be safe about it and all that kind of stuff. Or if you can't get it up all that high, put it on the top of a bookshelf or something. The idea behind the height is to give people a perspective that they're not used to seeing, right? So when we record a video at eye level, that's fine. That's great. That's like someone's personal experience. If they were walking around in that house, that's how they would see things, right? But when I give you a view from a different perspective, it's going to increase the curiosity in your brain, right? You're going to see that and go, wow, I've never sort of seen a room from that angle. Like, where is this camera even shooting from, right? So in this case, we're sort of thinking like ceiling fan. We're thinking, up on top of a bookcase, something like that. And then we're just simply time-lapsing what happens, right? So you can hit the record button on the time-lapse, set it up there on the bookshelf or get it wrapped around the fan blade, whatever it is, and then just simply record what's going on below. And what's going to happen is, it doesn't almost, as long as there's some sort of activity, like One of my favorite versions of this is home improvement. So if you're painting a room, staining a fence, right? Anything where there's going to be a change that happens over time, which is why I think anytime you stage a house, if you're not creating a time lapse of that experience, that's a huge mistake, right? Because you can literally make a time lapse and say, hey, can you envision yourself moving into this home? Watch this and see if it feels like it would be the right fit for you, right? And they see it, and at first it's empty, and I can't kind of envision what that's like. And then over the next 20 seconds, they see all this cool furniture getting added to that room. All of a sudden, now it looks like a home. What do they think? And they're starting to envision themselves in that environment, right? So it's a really great way to show off a house, to show off a listing without just talking about the house, right? Without just sort of hammering on about what the features are and things like that, right? So that's my final sort of phone hack for you. It's not so much a hack because it is built into the phone itself, right? It used to be a few years ago, you would need a third-party app to do this. But at this point, it is pretty straightforward. And I'll tell you right now, if you can do this stuff, it'll make really, really engaging content for social, right? Which is a great place to use it.